because it doesn't believe that it's really free. And I think it's a wonderful metaphor for the truth that freedom can't be forced on. We have to believe it's there. And we have to be willing to step out and take advantage of it. So Jesus comes to his hometown and preaches that passage from Isaiah. And today we learn that the folks who heard him were all impressed with what he had to say. And then they said, wait a minute. We know this dude. He's old Joe's son. Who is he to come into our town and tell us what to do? And what happens is their minds close to the possibility. We know who this guy is. He can't possibly do wonderful things. And then they start saying to him things like, why don't you do the wonderful things here you did when you were in Capernaum? And the reason he can't is because they're like doves inside that cage, and the cage has been opened, but they can't see the blue sky. They're not going to allow the possibility. Unlike Jeremiah, who when he said, oh, I'm just a boy, and God said it doesn't matter, do it anyway. Jeremiah, by the way, goes on to camp out naked in front of the city wall in Jerusalem, which is thankfully asking more of him than most of us will be asked of. In fact, if you find yourself in a position where you feel compelled to go get naked on behalf of Jesus, please call me right away, because we'll get you to a hospital. They don't accept what he has to say because they think they know who he is. And so they won't let the message come home to them. And then he tells them two stories, which are important. Or I should say it's important to know what the stories really are. With the story of Elijah, the heaven being shut up for 3 years and 6 months, there was a great period of drought, which led to a great period of famine. And Elijah was sent to a widow in a town called Zarephath in Sidon. And she had a little bit of flour left, and she had a little bit of oil left. And Elijah said, make me something to eat. Now I should tell you that prophets of virtually every tradition, and teachers and gurus, when they show up at somebody's house, they immediately ask for something to eat, which explains quite a bit. And so Elijah tells the widow not to worry, that she should make him something to eat, and the flour won't run out, and the oil won't run out until it rains. And that happens. The lepers come to Elisha, and it's the foreigner that's cleansed. Just as the woman in Sidon, there in Zarephath, was a foreigner. And so here he's talking to Jewish people, and they're not accepting what he has to say, and they believe they have an inside track to God by the nature of their Jewishness or their Hebrewness, that they are part of God's chosen people, and that's all they need. And they get offended when Jesus comes and reminds them of the universality of God's message, that everybody's welcome, that everybody's being drawn in, that it isn't just you, but rather everybody, and it shuts them down. They say, oh, I don't want to hear about a God who's going to do this. Unless we get too critical of them, there's still plenty of folks running around today who don't want to hear about a God that's going to do this. Anybody who thinks that there's anything about anyone that disqualifies them from being a child of God and from God's Spirit coming to dwell in them is wrong. And we know they're wrong because Jesus is quite clear that everyone is welcome. And then it's very interesting to watch what happens. They decide to act violently. And how does Jesus get away? Well, traditionally, at least in my experience, I was taught that it was some sort of magical, mysterious thing because Jesus just slipped through, made himself invisible or whatever, and flew away. But I think now it's really symbolic of a much greater truth. Jesus was ultimately the ultimate person of peace. And our God is the God of peace. And they came to try and extinguish peace and peaceful inclusion with violence, and it never, ever, ever works. Gandhi freed India, not through violence, but through nonviolence. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had such a profound impact on the civil rights movement, not through violence, but through nonviolence. And Jesus, way before either of those two, had such a profound impact, not through violence, but through nonviolence. Remember when he was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane? Someone drew a sword and cut off the ear of one of the people coming to arrest him. And he restored the ear and said, "Put away your sword." When Pilate interrogated him, and he said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it was of this world, I could call angels down to destroy you." It's a continual message of peace, and so it's very interesting that our opening prayer today, or if you like the stuffy language, our collect, said, "As we marvel at the grace and power of your word, enlighten us to see the beauty of the gospel and strengthen us to embrace its demands." For me, today, and really every day, but these lessons are lessons of peace. What's the demand of the gospel? Peace. And it's peace in thought, word, and deed. Let's go backwards. Deed. I'm not going to smack anybody. We have a problem with nuclear armament in this country. We need to disarm. The only reason for a military ever to take action in this world is in a humanitarian mission, such as we're seeing in Haiti, such as we saw in the Second World War, and arguably what we saw when we went, and I'm drawing a complete blank, to rescue the medical students in Latin America, and it starts with a G in the 80s. It'll come to me. It's not Guatemala. That's the only reason to have a military. So now we've taken care of deed. Thought. That's the hardest one, isn't it? We move towards God exactly to the extent that we can look at the person we find most reprehensible and see God in them. We move towards peace in thought as we open ourselves to the Spirit in the same way that Jeremiah did when he said, "Oh, I can't do this." And God said, "Don't worry, I'll do it for you." And finally, word with some more overlap into deed. When we stop racist jokes and overt racism. When we stop sexist jokes and sexism. Ageist jokes and ageism. When we stop excluding anyone in our mind and in our actions. Only then have we become people of peace. So really, the easiest part is to put down your sword. The hardest part is to change your insides, to embrace the gospel, to become this person of peace, who sees God, not just Jesus. You know, it's almost trite to say, I need to see Jesus in everything. But you have to look deeper to see the Spirit of God in people, I do believe. You see God in everyone. The beggar at the door, even the allegedly homeless person in Austin, Texas that one of our clergy saw the other day, standing with a sign asking for money and then taking a call on his cell phone. Even in that person, we must see God in everyone. And when we see God in them, we will no longer want to harm them. We will invite them in, and then and only then will we be truly embracing the gospel. And I don't blame you if you stand with me and say, but I'm only a boy. How can I do this? And the answer is to open yourself radically to God's Spirit and go beyond what you ever dreamed possible.